February 4th, 2018, Super Bowl 52. On one sideline stands Tom Brady, a dynasty, a certainty, a quarterback chasing another ring. On the other stands Nick Foles, a man who wasn't even supposed to finish the season. He wasn't the franchise star, he wasn't the MVP candidate. When Carson Wentz went down, the verdict across the league was immediate. Philadelphia's dream was over. The backup would not survive January. And yet, with the Lombardi Trophy on the line, it was Foles who stepped into the huddle. Foles who matched Brady throw for throw. Foles who lined up as a receiver on the most daring call in Super Bowl history and caught a touchdown that stunned the world. By the end of that night, the backup nobody believed in was Super Bowl MVP. But this story didn't begin in Minneapolis. It began in promise that faded too quickly, in a breakout season followed by doubt, in a trade that shook his confidence, and in quiet moments where walking away from football felt closer than glory. It's a story about faith when opportunity disappears, about humility when the spotlight moves on, and about being ready when the moment finally returns. Because greatness doesn't always arrive as the plan, it often arrives as the backup. This is the Eagles Chronicles, where we tell the defining stories of Philadelphia football with depth and respect. If you believe the most powerful journeys are the ones no one sees coming, subscribe and join us as we uncover how Nick Foles went from forgotten reserve to Super Bowl MVP.
Before the NFL, long before the confetti in Minneapolis, Nick Foles was just a kid growing up in Austin, Texas, raised in a close, faith-centered family that owned and operated successful restaurant businesses. Born on January 20th, 1989, he developed early as a multi-sport athlete, but football quickly became his path. At Westlake High School, he shared the quarterback room with future NFL star Drew Brees' successor lineage, yet he was not the most nationally hyped recruit. He committed to Michigan State out of high school, but after limited playing time and a coaching change, he made the difficult decision to transfer to the University of Arizona. It was there, under head coach Mike Stoops, that Foles truly emerged. In 2011, he threw for over 4,000 yards and 28 touchdowns, showcasing accuracy, poise, and intelligence that would eventually attract NFL attention. Still, he wasn't viewed as a franchise-changing prospect, more solid than spectacular. By the time he entered the 2012 NFL Draft, he carried experience, resilience, and quiet confidence, but little of the spotlight that usually follows future Super Bowl MVPs. Drafted to compete. In the 2012 NFL Draft, Nick Foles was selected in the third round, 88th overall, by the Philadelphia Eagles. He wasn't drafted to be the future of the franchise. He was brought in to compete and develop behind established starter Michael Vick. Under head coach Andy Reid, Foles entered a locker room built to win now, not to groom a rookie quarterback. His early appearances came out of necessity, not design, as injuries forced him into action late in his rookie season. He showed flashes of composure and arm strength, but also the inconsistency expected from a young quarterback adjusting to NFL speed. When Reid was fired after the season and Chip Kelly arrived in 2013, Foles' future became even more uncertain. He wasn't the headline name. He wasn't the centerpiece of a rebuild. He was simply another quarterback fighting to prove he belonged. The 27-2 season, 2013 breakout. When Chip Kelly took over in 2013, the Eagles were entering a new era built on speed, tempo, and offensive innovation. Michael Vick began the season as the starter, but when injury forced him out, Nick Foles stepped in, and everything changed. What followed was one of the most efficient quarterback stretches in NFL history. Foles didn't just manage games, he exploded. In a single afternoon against the Oakland Raiders, he threw 7 touchdown passes, tying an NFL record. Week after week, he protected the football with remarkable discipline, finishing the season with 27 touchdown passes and just 2 interceptions, an almost unheard-of ratio. His passer rating soared. The Eagles surged. A quarterback who had entered the year fighting for relevance suddenly looked like the future of the franchise. Philadelphia won the NFC East, and Foles earned his first Pro Bowl selection. For a moment, it felt like the league had discovered its next breakout star.
But what made that season so stunning was not just the numbers, it was the calm. Foles played with poise beyond expectation, operating Kelly's up-tempo system with precision and confidence. The backup had become a phenomenon. Yet even in that breakout year, few could have predicted how dramatically the story would twist in the seasons that followed. The fall. After the brilliance of 2013, the expectation was simple. This was the beginning. Nick Foles entered the 2014 season not as a backup, not as a question mark, but as the presumed franchise quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles. But the magic didn't return the same way. Injuries interrupted his rhythm, and the effortless efficiency that defined the 2017 season began to fade. The offense stalled. The confidence that once looked unshakable started to waver. By 2015, the reset came abruptly. Foles was traded to the St. Louis Rams in a deal that signaled Philadelphia was ready to move on. In St. Louis, under a struggling offense and a conservative system, the decline deepened. Touchdowns turned into turnovers. Wins were hard to find. The quarterback who once tied an NFL record for touchdown passes in a game now found himself benched. Criticism grew louder. Doubt followed everywhere. For the first time in his career, the question wasn't whether he could be great, it was whether he would survive in the league at all. Confidence cracked, the spotlight disappeared, and in the quiet that followed, Nick Foles began to wonder if football was still the path he was meant to walk. Faith and doubt. By the time his stint with the Rams unraveled and a brief return to Kansas City left him off the field, Nick Foles found himself at a crossroads he never imagined facing so early in his career. Just 2 seasons removed from a Pro Bowl year, he was no longer seen as a rising star. He was a question mark. The noise of the league had faded, and in that silence came something heavier: doubt. He later admitted that during this period, he seriously considered stepping away from football altogether. The game that once felt like purpose now felt uncertain. Confidence had eroded. Identity felt shaken. What steadied him was not a contract or a promise of playing time, but his faith. Foles has always spoken openly about how faith shaped his perspective, not just belief in himself, but belief in something greater than the game. In the middle of career instability, he leaned into that foundation. He spoke about the possibility of pursuing ministry, about finding fulfillment beyond touchdowns and statistics. For a professional athlete in his 20s, it was an unusually honest moment of vulnerability. This wasn't about mechanics or playbooks, it was about meaning. In choosing to continue, Foles didn't recommit because he was certain of stardom. He returned because he found peace in the uncertainty. And that quiet recalibration, away from ego, away from expectation, would become the unseen strength behind the most improbable championship run of his life. The return to Philadelphia, 2017. In 2017, Nick Foles returned to Philadelphia not as a savior, but as a backup. The Eagles had found their future in Carson Wentz, a young quarterback playing at an MVP level and leading the team toward what looked like a historic season. Foles signed a modest 2-year deal to serve as the number 2, a steady veteran presence, insurance in case something went wrong. There were no headlines celebrating his comeback, no expectations that he would see meaningful snaps. This was supposed to be Wentz's team, Wentz's story, Wentz's Super Bowl chase. Foles' role was simple: support, prepare, stay ready.
Then, in Week 14 against the Los Angeles Rams, everything shifted. Carson Wentz tore his ACL after throwing what would be a touchdown pass, and in a single moment, the trajectory of the franchise changed. Lincoln Financial Field went from celebration to silence. The Eagles were 11-2 and legitimate Super Bowl contenders, but now their MVP candidate was gone. Into that uncertainty stepped Nick Foles. Not the 27-2 phenom, not the struggling Ram, just the backup once again handed a season he wasn't meant to finish. The pressure was immediate. National analysts declared the Eagles' championship hopes dead. Doubt returned louder than ever. Late in the regular season, Foles' performances were uneven and skepticism grew inside and outside the city. But inside the locker room, something different was happening. Teammates rallied, the underdog identity took shape. Foles didn't try to replace Wentz, he simply steadied the offense, leaned on preparation, and trusted the system Doug Peterson had built. He embraced the role, not as the star, but as the man who needed to be ready. Philadelphia didn't need him to be perfect, they needed him to be poised. And as the playoffs approached, the backup who had once considered retirement found himself at the center of a championship run no one saw coming. The doubt gets louder. When Nick Foles took over as the starter, the outside noise grew immediately. Analysts questioned whether the Eagles could survive the playoffs without Carson Wentz. Even within the fan base, confidence wavered. Foles' final regular season performances did little to quiet the skepticism. There were stalled drives, mistimed throws, and an offense that suddenly looked uncertain. Philadelphia still secured the #1 seed in the NFC, but instead of celebration, the narrative centered on vulnerability. Vegas installed them as home underdogs in the divisional round. The message was clear. The Eagles were no longer contenders. They were surviving on borrowed time. Doubt wasn't subtle anymore. It was loud, constant, and national. And at the center of it stood a quarterback many believed was simply keeping the seat warm until the inevitable arrived. The playoff run. The playoffs did not begin with dominance. They began with survival. In the divisional round against the Atlanta Falcons, the Eagles leaned on defense and resilience. It was a tense, low-scoring battle, and with the game on the line, it was Foles who delivered key throws to extend drives, setting up the final defensive stand in the end zone that sealed a narrow victory. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't historic, but it was steady. The Eagles advanced, and for the first time, belief began to flicker. Then came the NFC Championship game against the Minnesota Vikings. Philadelphia entered as underdogs once again, but something shifted that night. After an early deficit, Foles responded with precision and confidence that stunned even his harshest critics. He carved through one of the league's top defenses, throwing for 352 yards and 3 touchdowns in a 38-7 statement win. The offense flowed. The stadium roared. The backup, who had been doubted for weeks, suddenly looked composed, decisive, and in complete command. It was no longer about surviving without Carson Wentz. It was about what Nick Foles was becoming in real time. The Eagles were headed to the Super Bowl, and the narrative had changed. Super Bowl 52. Super Bowl 52 was never supposed to be his stage. Across the field stood Tom Brady and the New England Patriots, a dynasty chasing another ring, a quarterback chasing history. On paper, it looked uneven, a backup against the greatest of all time. But from the opening drive, Nick Foles didn't play like a placeholder. He played free. He attacked downfield, trusted his receivers, and matched Brady score for score in a game that quickly became one of the highest-scoring Super Bowls ever played. Then came the moment that would define everything. Late in the second quarter, facing 4th down near the goal line, head coach Doug Peterson kept the offense on the field. Instead of a standard call, the Eagles dialed up something daring.
Foles drifted toward the right side as if changing the play, then slipped unnoticed into the end zone. The ball was snapped, a quick pitch, a pass floating toward the quarterback. Touchdown, the Philly special. In the boldest moment of the season, the backup caught a touchdown in the Super Bowl. It wasn't just execution, it was belief. But the night wasn't won on one trick play. Foles continued trading blows with Brady, finishing with 373 passing yards, 3 touchdown passes, and a receiving touchdown, accounting for 4 total scores. When the final Hail Mary fell incomplete, the scoreboard read 41-33. The Eagles were champions, and Nick Foles, the man who wasn't supposed to be there, was named Super Bowl MVP. In one night, doubt dissolved into history. The backup nobody believed in had delivered one of the most unforgettable performances the game has ever seen.
The aftermath. In the hours after the final whistle, the narrative flipped completely. Nick Foles walked off the field not as a substitute, but as Super Bowl MVP. Philadelphia erupted. The parade down Broad Street became a celebration not just of a championship, but of belief defied. Foles' calm demeanor never changed. He credited teammates, coaches, and faith rather than claiming the spotlight. Yet his place in franchise history was sealed. Statues were built. The Philly special became immortalized outside Lincoln Financial Field. But even in triumph, reality waited. Carson Wentz was still the franchise quarterback, the long-term investment, the future of the organization. Nick Foles, despite delivering the only Super Bowl in Eagles history, stepped back into the role he had started with: backup. It was one of the strangest dynamics in modern NFL history, a Super Bowl MVP holding a clipboard. The city adored him, but the depth chart remained unchanged. In 2018, when injuries struck again and Wentz went down late in the season, Foles was called upon once more, and once again, he delivered. He led a late-season surge to secure a playoff berth and engineered a dramatic wild-card victory in Chicago, sealed by the infamous double-doink missed field goal. For a moment, it felt like the magic was repeating itself, but the run ended the following week in New Orleans, just short of another miracle. That offseason, the Eagles faced an impossible decision. Foles declined his option, became a free agent, and signed a lucrative deal with the Jacksonville Jaguars, this time as the unquestioned starter. The symbol symbolized both reward and risk. In Jacksonville, injuries and inconsistency followed. The rhythm that defined his Super Bowl run never fully returned. Stints in Chicago and Indianapolis would follow, each reinforcing a truth that had become clear. Nick Foles was never meant to be a long-term dynasty quarterback. He was something rarer, a player capable of rising to a singular, unforgettable moment when everything was on the line. The future after the miracle was complicated, uneven, and at times humbling, but it never erased what he had already accomplished. What made it possible? Nick Foles' Super Bowl run wasn't built on raw talent alone. It was built on fit, trust, and mindset. Doug Peterson tailored the offense to Foles' strengths, leaning into quick reads, RPO concepts, and aggressive downfield shots that restored his confidence. The locker room never treated him like a temporary replacement. Veteran leaders like Jason Kelce, Fletcher Cox, and Malcolm Jenkins reinforced belief internally, even when the outside world doubted. His chemistry with receivers, particularly Alshon Jeffrey and Zach Ertz, allowed him to play decisively rather than cautiously. Just as important was his perspective. Having already faced failure, trades, and thoughts of walking away, Foles played without the fear of losing his job or protecting a reputation. His faith grounded him, keeping the moment from becoming overwhelming. Preparation met opportunity at exactly the right time. It wasn't that he suddenly became someone different, it was that everything aligned: system, teammates, confidence, and timing. And when that moment arrived, he was ready. Legacy in Philadelphia.
In Philadelphia, Nick Foles' legacy is not measured by seasons, it's measured by a moment that changed everything. He delivered the first Super Bowl in franchise history and earned Super Bowl MVP in the process, forever tying his name to the greatest night the city has known. The Philly special became more than a trick play. It became a symbol of belief and boldness, immortalized with a statue outside Lincoln Financial Field. Teammates and fans remember not just the throws, but the calm, his steady presence when the pressure was highest. Though Carson Wentz was the long-term starter and Foles' time as QB1 was brief, his impact remains permanent. In Eagles history, he represents resilience, faith, and readiness when destiny calls. He may not have built a dynasty in Philadelphia, but he delivered a championship, and that is enough to ensure he will always be remembered as the backup who became immortal in Midnight Green.
Some careers are defined by longevity, some by statistics. Nick Foles' career is defined by a moment when preparation met opportunity, when doubt met belief, when a backup stepped into the brightest spotlight in sports and refused to blink. He was never supposed to be the franchise cornerstone. He wasn't drafted to carry a dynasty. He wasn't the plan. And yet, when the season hung in the balance, when the city held its breath, it was Nick Foles who delivered the greatest night in Philadelphia Eagles history. His journey wasn't smooth. It wasn't linear. It wasn't built on constant success. It was built on resilience, faith, humility, and the courage to stay ready when the world moves on from you. And that is why his story endures, not because he was perfect, but because he was prepared. This has been the Eagles Chronicles, where we tell the defining stories behind the Midnight Green with depth, honesty, and respect for the moments that shaped a franchise. If this story reminded you why you love this game, make sure you like the video, share it with fellow Eagles fans, and subscribe for more in-depth documentaries on the legends, underdogs, and unforgettable chapters of Philadelphia football. Because sometimes the most powerful stories belong to the ones nobody believed in.